Welcome to A Way Forward, the podcast where I sit down and have real discussions about the challenges we face in our cities, communities, and neighborhoods. The goal of this podcast is to create a space that includes expert interviews, guests with lived experiences, and voices not often heard. I'm your host, retired Police Chief Daniel Hahn, and I will bring my experience in law enforcement, community, and education to each conversation so that together we can build a way forward. Welcome to A Way Forward. Today's episode will be a little bit on remembering the lessons that we've learned throughout history, especially being Black History Month, a few lessons that we've learned throughout our country's history, especially on follow through on new ideas. So by that, I mean, we can look throughout history and at times find things. For example, after the Civil War, we passed the 13th Amendment that literally says slavery is prohibited, because that was really what the Civil War was over slavery. So now slavery is prohibited. Yet we didn't address what was the root causes of slavery, the belief system we had in our country about inferior people, about what was good for people, what wasn't good for people. We never addressed any of that. We just literally took like a pen and wrote on paper, basically, this is what we fought this war for. We can't do that anymore. And so what resulted from that is we as a country found new ways to continue the institution of slavery through black codes, convict leasing, that at times, per some historians, was worse than slavery itself, because we didn't do the collaboration. We didn't address the root causes of what we were trying to solve with the 13th Amendment. You can fast forward to, say, the 15th Amendment in 1870 that said everybody has the right to vote. Everybody should be able to vote. Well, if we complied with that, why did we need the Voting Rights Act of 1965, almost 100 years later? Because we found other ways to keep the groups that we did not want voting from voting. Things like grandfather clauses and poll taxes and literacy tests, all the way into the 60s, 1960s. And so today, as we look at how do we, if we just stick to public safety, say, one, I think we have to understand public safety is more than just a police department, a sheriff's department, a district attorney's office. Public safety is how safe are our people in our communities? What contributes to that? Parks contribute to that. Schools contribute to that, not just law enforcement agencies. So a few years back, we passed a law in California about realignment that shifted the burden of custody, supervision of convicted felons, for example, back onto the counties. In theory, you might think, well, those counties, the sheriff's departments, the probation departments, have more at stake because these folks that are incarcerated are from that community. So they have a stake in the game. They have, like, I want to get this right because these folks are in my community. I agree with all that. But if we don't give the resources to the sheriff's department, to the probation department, to the mental health services, to the social services, then really all we're doing is shifting the burden of custody and supervision to somebody and reentry to somebody without the resources they need to actually accomplish it. Then we had Prop 47 that lessened penalties for certain crimes like drugs. It's no secret, study after studies have shown this. I think people in the community can just, without looking at a study, would know this, that poverty and mental illness and drugs are big drivers of crime. Yet if we look at our systems that address those issues, they're not robust enough to handle the volume of that. So Prop 47 lessened penalties because we shouldn't be keeping people in prison for 20 years for a drug offense, right? It's a health issue. Yet we didn't implement the systems that would address that health issue. We just said, you're not going to be in prison anymore. So crime starts to rise. Now we just passed in California Prop 36 that increased those penalties. But we still need to address the underlying causes of drugs, drug addiction, mental health, education. We still have a disparate system where some schools have more resources than others. We still have abject poverty in every city across our country. We still have economically, basically deprived neighborhoods where people have to leave their community to go to the store, people have to leave their community to go to work, and they're just living in impoverished conditions. So unless when we pass these rules, we provide the support and the collaboration to actually fully implement it, we'll be doing just like we did when we said everybody's free, and yet we instituted a new system of slavery. Everybody can vote, yet then we just implemented new systems that prevented those same groups from voting because we did not address the underlying root causes. And so I'll give one last example, and that is, when there was a lot of very public on social media, on mainstream news, shootings where police departments were shooting or killing, especially African-American men, George Floyd, Stephon Clark, things like that. We started really emphasizing basically community oversight over the police department, police commissions. Pretty much every major city has some version of a police commission. And instead of what a Martin Luther King would have believed in is collaborating on that, working together so we can make tomorrow better instead of one group taking power over another. A lot of cities, including Sacramento, implemented these police commissions, and one of the rules of these commissions were nobody with any law enforcement experience can be on the commission. So as a lifelong person that has lived in Sacramento my entire life, I thought, well, I must be less of a citizen of this community if I've lived here every day of my life, and yet I can't be on that commission because of the profession that I chose. And I think around that same time when COVID hit, you think, would we create a committee to figure out how to address the health toll costs of COVID and say scientists and doctors couldn't be on that committee? We would never say that. And so that's not collaborative. As Martin Luther King used to say, believe it or not, Martin Luther King was against like the Black Power movement. He was against the Black Power, that saying, Black Power. And not because he didn't think people rightfully felt angry, not that he didn't think there was plenty of reason why folks should feel like that. He empathized with them. He knew why they felt like that. He understood why they felt like that. He just said, I know it won't work. Because first of all, any group with ultimate power will do bad things to other groups. So it's this group doing something bad to my group right now, but if tomorrow I have all the power, then my group is going to be doing something bad to somebody else. So again, if we want to implement laws, policies, procedures that are going to benefit our community and make us better tomorrow, it has to be collaborative, and it has to address the root causes, and it has to have follow through. Just writing it on a piece of paper isn't going to change anything. In Martin Luther King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here?, he talked about President Lyndon Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act, which is a huge bit of legislation for our country. No doubt about it. It is what truly allowed a whole lot of people to freely vote, whereas before that, they were not allowed to freely vote. So a critical piece of legislation. And in his speech of signing that bill in the rotunda of our nation's capital, he said, this removes the last major shackle of, basically freedom for all people in our country. And Martin Luther King goes on to say that within a week and within a year, there was full-blown riots in places like Newark, Detroit, Watts. So if this was the last major shackle, then why are there still so many people that are angry enough to burn down whole cities? Because it wasn't the last major shackle. It was just ink on a piece of paper, which is critically important, but the follow-through is just as important in order to ensure that what is written on paper is actually fulfilled in our communities, and people have hope. People feel like the system is supportive of me instead of segregating me, discriminating against me. And I'm not just talking about the African-American community. I'm talking about all of our communities have to feel like our system, our government, our policies, our way of life is equitable, equal, and allows them to dream and hope To this day, we have whole communities that are in such poverty, and the education systems are not up to par with other systems, that a lot of times they don't have hope. And so in an environment where there's no hope, where there's abject poverty, where there's a lack of resources in education, it provides an environment, a petri dish, if you will, that welcomes crime. That, well, why not? If I have no hope for my future, then being in a shooting or some other crime, there's really no consequences. I didn't have a future anyway. And one thing I saw growing up in Oak Park in a time where the crack epidemic was in full force is a lot of the people that I saw that got into trouble were people that didn't have hope. They didn't expect to live past 30. They didn't expect to have a job. They thought certain jobs were not for them. And the one thing that got me through is my family, my mom, ensured that I did have hope. She made me believe I can do whatever I want. So even though this environment is around me, I still believed if I put in the work, I can get somewhere. And so we have to have the follow through. We have to have leaders who don't just come up with ink on a piece of paper, but also work collaboratively to ensure that it actually takes place. To bring this to a close, final thoughts, especially in honor of Black History Month, I'd just like to kind of remind people, if you think about what great leaders in our history of our country, people like Martin Luther King, think about what he went through. He was stabbed. He had numerous death threats. He was spied on by the FBI. He had haters, if you will, in the Black community that did not agree with the nonviolent movement because they see this nonviolent movement going on for years, and yet they're still experiencing the same segregation, the same poverty, the same redlining, and all these things. So they're like, this is not working. So we need Black power. We need to take it by force. And yet Martin Luther King did a couple things. One, he stuck to his guns. He still believed that this is the way forward. He believed that collaboration was the way to get there. He did not advocate for separating from, the Black community, segregating themselves, creating their own bus lines and stores and things like that. And he was, I think in hindsight, we can see he was pretty successful in that. He integrated bus systems, or he helped. There's a lot of people involved in that. Movements, the nonviolent movement integrated lunch counters and stores, things that weren't taking place before they did those things. So in closing, I think we can take lessons from leaders like that and many others, that if we believe in doing it together, and we're so committed that no matter what you do, I'm going to stick to my beliefs. I'm not going to waver. And my beliefs are selfless in that I want to help the entire community. We can make tomorrow better. Martin Luther King never advocated for going back to Africa, never advocated for not being an American citizen. He took pride in our country. And I think what I often see is people saying that if you are upset about something in our country, then you're not patriotic, you're not loyal to this country. I think this is the greatest country on earth, but I think we can be better. And those two things can exist at the same time. And we should always be trying to get better. When we think about our children, we're hard on our children. There's nobody we love more than our children, and yet we're hard on them. Why? Because we know they can be better. We want them to learn the lessons that will suit them in the future. And so in closing, I think we as a country can do better. We have a great country now, but if we work together, if we collaborate, we're always going to have differences. But if we believe that we are going to get there together instead of separating different groups of people, then we will have a better tomorrow than we have today.